Huge shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. We couldn't do this show without you, so I just wanted to say thank you. And if you want to help support us, go to patreon.com/Skiba News Nation.
I don't care what it costs. I want to know what the truth is. And I hope that people, my son, anybody, if my name comes up, whether you like me, whether you agree with me or not, at least you could respect the fact that he's on a quest for truth. He's on a quest for truth.
Welcome to Skiba News Nation, bringing you unfiltered views, news, interviews, discussions, and more. And now, here's your host, Jeremiah Skiba, award-winning musician and son of Rob Skiba.
Welcome to Skiba News Nation.
I've been through a long, weird life of, religions and cults. If you want to really understand the power of Lucifer, join the Masonic Lodge. And then he happened to be a 33rd degree Mason, in addition to being the Grand Master Druid of North America. And then he said, in different contexts, he said, if you ever get into spiritual trouble, you should join the Mormon Church and appear to be, nice white picket fence, all-American, Christians, quote unquote. But secretly, he said, they believe all the same things the Druids do. It's like once you let the camel's nose into the tent, you start getting deeper and deeper into deception. The devil does give his servants a certain level of occult power. Otherwise, nobody would stay in magic. I said, what's going on? I sold my soul to the devil. I did all this stuff for you. I got other people to sell their souls to the devil. And what's so amazing is that even though I was praying to Lucifer, the Almighty King of the universe, Yeshua HaMashiach, answered that prayer. It's real. And the devil is real. But the Lord, Yeshua HaMashiach, is much more real. Hallelujah. Masonry is basically the world's largest witch coven.
Oh yeah! Before we got into it, I just wanted to say hi to Bill. We bumped into each other a few times over the years. I just wanted to say thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure to see you again, brother.
Yeah, and it's nice to meet you. We've never met. I'm Jeremiah Skiba, so I'm Rob's son. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because I don't know you much.
Well, I've been through a long, weird life of, religions and cults, raised Catholic, became a witch on the advice of a Catholic priest when I was in minor seminary. I wanted to be a priest. And, got involved heavily in witchcraft. I'll try and make this brief, but basically went and studied Druidism. The Druid faith, which is a sort of branch of witchcraft down in Arkansas. We're taught, this is 1973, so I've been at this for, 50 years. And anyway, in the course of being made a Druidic high priest, the guy told me two things. Number one, he said, if you want to really understand the power of Lucifer, join the Masonic Lodge. And then he happened to be a 33rd degree Mason, in addition to being the Grand Master Druid of North America. And then he said, in different contexts, he said, if you ever get into spiritual trouble, you should join the Mormon Church. Because they were a church that was founded by witches, for witches, to kind of have a place to, so to speak, hide out and appear to be, nice white picket fence, all-American, Christians, quote unquote. But secretly, he said, they believe all the same things the Druids do. So that was the launching pad. And I spent 10 years in Milwaukee running witch covens, initiating hundreds of women into witchcraft, because in Wicca, the high priest initiates the women and the high priestess initiates the men. Well, that was the way it was. By now it's probably all, weird. But anyway, what do they say? Gender fluid. I got involved because there was an occult bookstore in Milwaukee, and the owner told me if I really wanted to understand the true power of magic, I should read the Satanic Bible. So even though at the time I didn't even believe in the devil, I thought, well, okay, this guy's been at this longer than I have. So I read the Satanic Bible, and this was around 1975, and ultimately ended up joining the Church of Satan because, and this is the thing. Like so many of these things, it's like once you let the camel's nose into the tent, you start getting deeper and deeper into deception. And whereas in 1971 or 72, I would have never dreamt of thinking of becoming a Satanist, by the time 1975 rolled around, here I was reading the Satanic Bible. So I joined the Church of Satan, and in a year or two I became a second-degree member, which is called Warlock. And from there I got into hardcore Satanism, which is pretty awful stuff. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it except to say that, very, very deep stuff. I mean, we wrote a whole book, Lucifer Dethroned, about my journey through all of this and how, obviously, Yeshua, Jesus, ended up saving me. But what happened was I actually ended up getting a check back from the Church of Satan. This was in 1980. Because every year I'd send out, I forget, it was $10 or something to get their magazine, which was called The Cloven Hoof, by the way. And when the check came back from the bank, as they used to do, some lady from the bank had written on it, "I'll be praying for you in Jesus' name." And obviously she realized that I was in some pretty deep spiritual doo-doo. And so I just scoffed at it. I put the check in my file and forgot about it. But within a couple of days, it's like a Mack truck hit me spiritually. And I lost my job. I lost all the occult power that I had, because make no mistake about it, the devil does give his servants a certain level of occult power. Otherwise, nobody would stay in magic, because nobody's going to stay in something. Like I was at that time, let me think, I would have been involved in that stuff for basically 11 or 12 years. And if you never get anything out of it, you're going to go find something else. So he throws his followers a bone every now and then, sometimes literally. And I lost it all. I had no more occult power. I lost my job. I felt as sick as a dog. We had a temple up in the attic of our home we were renting that was painted entirely black. Had a magic circle on the floor, a big bust of Pan, the great god Pan, quote unquote. I was a follower of Crowley, all of this weird stuff. And I cried out to Lucifer for a sign. I said, "What's going on? I sold my soul to the devil. I did all this stuff for you. I got other people to sell their souls to the devil." Because in this form of Satanism, I mean, there's different varieties of this, just like any other religion. It was kind of like Amway, in that the more people you got under you, the more powerful you would become. And I'm not saying Amway is satanic. I'm just saying it's like a spiritual multi-level marketing program. So anyhow, I asked Lucifer for a sign because I'd done everything he told me to do. And what's so amazing is that even though I was praying to Lucifer, the Almighty King of the universe, Yeshua HaMashiach, answered that prayer. And literally, within 24 hours, we were contacted by these two teenage Satanists from Chicago, which is just, down the freeway a bit from Milwaukee. They wanted to come up and meet me because of my renowned reputation as a high-level warlock. So anyway, they show up. They said they wanted to give me something as a gift. When they came up to see me, they presented me with two Christian comic books, Jack Chick comic books about the occult. And they said, you got to read these things. They're hilarious. They use the word Neanderthal to describe them. And I just kind of glanced at them and thought they looked dopey and threw them in the corner and forgot about them. The next day, 2 Mormon missionaries showed at our door. And we thought, well, maybe this is a sign. Because I remembered, 6 years, 7 years earlier, this Grand High Druid guy telling me if I ever got into spiritual trouble, join the Mormon Church. So we joined the Mormon Church. And as unbelievable as it sounds, I mean, we've documented all of this. I mean, the first book I wrote with Jim Spencer, beloved memory, we had photocopies of all of, from the witches, from the Satanists, from the Mormon Church, my temple recommend, all of that stuff. So, it's real. And the devil is real. But the Lord, Yeshua HaMashiach, is much more real. Hallelujah. And anyway, so the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, used the Mormon Church as a spiritual decompression chamber. Because you hear these stories about they take these fish that are in the deepest part of the ocean and they bring them up to the surface and they go and explode because they can't stand the change in pressure. And I think, the Ruach HaKodesh understood that it'd be kind of a weird thing to go all the way from being like a hardcore Satanist up to being a born-again Christian in 1 week without having something happen. So the Mormon Church taught me how to pretend to be a Christian. And it also remarkably got me to read the Bible. Now understand something. I wanted to be a priest, okay? I have a minor seminary degree from Loras College. I have a master's degree in theology from a Catholic seminary in Milwaukee, St. Francis School of Pastoral Ministry. I also happen to have post-Christian, a degree in counseling from Liberty University. But anyway, so I had all of this theological training. I had never read the Bible, never opened the Bible. So at least, and of course the Mormons, for most purposes, do use the King James Bible. So for the first time in my life, I actually was reading the Bible. And I just was convicted by the power, especially of Paul's words, Rav Shaul. And I realized I couldn't be a Mormon and follow what was in the book of Galatians or in the book of Romans. So after, months of studying, I went to a seminar. It was I didn't know what it was. It was advertised in the local paper as a prophecy seminar. You got to understand, Mormons believe they're being run by a living prophet. So I thought this will be interesting. I can go there and I can steal some sheep because I belong to the one true church. So I thought. And anyway, I got there and I had never, ever in my life encountered a born-again Christian. Now, that's remarkable when you think about it. Prior to that, I was living in a city, Milwaukee, hundreds of thousands of people, and nobody would ever come to our door. Even the Jehovah's Witnesses would never come to our door. They were terrified of our house because our house kind of had a reputation in the neighborhood of being like, the Addams family or something. So anyway, this guy just nailed it to me. I had all these smart aleck questions to ask him, and he had an answer right out of the book, right out of the Bible, for everything that I asked. And so finally, I asked him, because this is a key linchpin. The Mormons believe that either you've got to be a Catholic, because they claim, to have this apostolic succession all the way back to Peter the Apostle, or you've got to be a Mormon, because they would say that the Protestant churches, which basically you could very easily say all the churches in America, whether or not they're literally Reformed churches like the Presbyterians or whatever, they're offshoots of the Protestant Reformation. And I think most people would agree with that. So, that was the premise under which I was operating. And I said, well, where do you, Mr. Evangelist guy, get the authority to baptize people so they can be saved? And he said, well, where do you get the idea but you need like that kind of authority. He says, it says in Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. And that nailed me. It went right through my magic Mormon underwear, hit me in the heart. And yeah, Mormons wear magic underwear, or at least temple Mormons. So I went home and prayed and fasted, did all the things that a good Mormon is supposed to do when they're confronted with a spiritual dilemma. And finally, I remembered those comic books, which I still had in a box in the closet. I took them out because I remembered in the back of it, there was this thing about how to become born again. And I thought to myself, well, I've tried every other, literally, God-forsaken thing in the book. I might as well try this. So I prayed the prayer that was in the back of the Chick comic book, and I got born again. Hallelujah. And then, a couple years later, I was called into the ministry. I went out, was hired by Ed Decker, who's the author. I don't know if you've heard of Ed Decker, but he's the author of the God Makers books, and just a mighty man of Elohim, who's now, he's pretty advanced in years, but he's still kicking, he's still writing, he's still doing what he can. I think he's in his mid-80s, bless his heart. And then I went off and we started with One Accord Ministries in 1992. And we've been slugging it away ever since. So that's my story, and I guess what was that, like 15 minutes?
Awesome. Well, I have also in my notes that you were an ex-Freemason, the 90th degree. Can you touch upon that? Because I personally know some ex-Freemasons that were pretty high up, and they would like to know more about the 90th degree because they're not familiar.
Well, no. Most American Freemasons don't know about that. I was brought in to the higher degrees partially by a guy who was the son of Pappus. And Pappus was a famous late 19th, he was a contemporary of Aleister Crowley. He was a famous occultist in France who wrote one of the most highly regarded books on the tarot cards called the Tarot of the Bohemians. And his son brought me in to what is called the Rite of Memphis Mithraeum. And you may recognize that as the Mithraeum is, of course, the Hebrew word for Egypt. And Memphis is, of course, a city on the Nile in Egypt. I'm not talking about the one in Tennessee.
I love Memphis, Tennessee.
This degree, this branch of Masonry is not recognized in regular Grand Lodge Masonry. Without getting too deep into the weeds, all American conventional Masonry is from the Grand Lodge of England, because of course the colonies were all English, and Masonry came over with some of the pilgrims, not probably literally the pilgrims, but some of the guys that came over from England. So this is a different branch of Masonry that's a part of what is called Grand Orient Masonry, which is much more overtly anti-Christian. It is also very much more satanic, although it isn't obviously that.
And they're open about that when they
to a degree.
Okay.
To a limited degree. It depends on who you talk to. But you can go like, I don't know if you ever heard of Arthur Edward Waite, but he was a very famous late 19th, early 20th century occultist, slightly older than Aleister Crowley. And he wrote an encyclopedia of Freemasonry. And in that, you can, if you're a Mason, you don't believe me, you can go and you can look up the rite of Memphis and Mithraeum. They have, 360 degrees. And I got up to the 90th degree. Now, in America, most Masons only know of either the 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite or the 10 degrees of the York Rite. I did that too. I was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason and a 10th degree York Rite Mason. So I went through the whole deal, and the Scottish Rite is much more openly satanic than the York Rite is, but it's all pretty creepy. And I earnestly ask all anybody that might be listening, or if they have friends that are Masons, get out of it. And we have a book, which is our second bestseller, called Masonry Beyond the Light, which documents all of the stuff I'm talking about in great detail. And we even have a list in that book, I can't tell you the exact page, of all of the luminaries of 19th century occultism and 20th century occultism. Everybody from George Pickengill to Aleister Crowley to Arthur Rider Waite to Manly P. Hall, who just died in the 90s. All of these men were some of the greatest occult leaders of the last century and a half. Every single one of them was a high-level Mason. So Masonry is basically the world's largest witch coven.
Wow.
Jeremiah, if you don't mind me cutting in here while we're still on this topic.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I love that we're having Bill on. Bill was in the first documentary I ever put together. It was back in 2017, and I believe the title was Dark Covenant, Vampires, Lies of the Immortal. And I was during the time I worked for 90C TV, and we drove up there and we interviewed Bill, and he shared with us about his time with the Masons, and also his practicing time as a vampire as well, which was very, very interesting. I might even be able to slip a couple clips in of that documentary.
Where does the modern understanding of what we call vampires originate? Is it just lore, or do vampires have a foothold in reality? What does Scripture tell us about the consumption of blood, and how does this relate to the fallen celestial beings? Join us as we investigate the esoteric origins of blood rituals and how Hollywood has glamorized this practice in the media we consume. Vampires. Forever young, beautiful, powerful. These are many of the adjectives people associate with these shadowy figures of the night. A creature of legend that has been beautified by Hollywood to represent everything you could desire.
To be the ultimate outsider. And that's something that resonates so much with so many of us.
In recent years, vampires have reached all new heights of popularity, spurred on by an onslaught of television, books, games, and movies.
If it bleeds, it leads, and obviously a vampire story is going to bleed.
What was once the stuff of nightmares, now the fetish of modern America. Yet for some, the word vampire rings a different tune. A reality that lurks beneath the surface of our society, embedded deep within the esoteric workings of Satanism and the occult. Are vampires real? And what influence on our society do they have?
You aren't drinking anything but blood.
It's forbidden in the Bible to drink blood.
Certainly there's a tie to the occult.
It's appealing and it's romantic.
Whether people are attracted to the occult and then vampirism, or whether people are attracted to vampirism and then the occult, or whether they happen at roughly the same time, I think that's unique to the individual.
What is real vampirism?
That was, really interesting. Maybe we can talk about that briefly. But before we talk about that, and everybody's watching, going, "Wait a second! You said he was a practicing vampire for a while. Hold on, let's jump on that topic real quick." I wanted to look at the topic of Freemasonry briefly, and then maybe we can move on, and you can share your story with that experience. But we recently shared, last episode, we had a video of somebody talking about the slogan "Out of Chaos, Order." Order out of chaos. And I would love for you to speak on that, because that's a very Masonic central slogan, and we see that being implemented in the world today. And I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, what we're seeing in the world today, how are we seeing kind of this Freemasonic Hegelian dialectic manifest in today's world, this out of chaos order?
Well, that's the motto of the Scottish Rite. And I could, if I could bring it up, I don't have it right on hand, but I could show you my certificate from my 32nd degree Scottish Rite, and right on the top there's a banner that says Ordo ab Chao, order out of chaos. And yeah, you're very much right. It is an issue like the Hegelian dialectic. They believe that the world should be ruled by what they call philosopher kings, enlightened men. Notice that word. Another word might be the Illuminati, that will rule the world as benevolent dictators. Ha ha ha. And I think what they have been doing, especially since, I would say probably especially in the last 10, 15 years, and then accelerating more and more. And without wanting to get into politics, I think that the presidency of Donald Trump kind of threw a monkey wrench in their schedule, because he was in many ways a wild card. But they are trying to introduce more and more chaos into the system, whether it's political or religious or economic or even geopolitical. And that's why I believe we are seeing, and I talk about this a lot on my YouTube channel, a lot of even in the churches, chaos, people moving away from the Bible, people, either it's, it's okay, we can get married if we're gay, or, you can be baptized. I mean, like the Pope. Don't even get me started on this current Pope. But anyway, he even said, you can bless, gay couples. I mean, that's an abomination. But that's the least of what, this particular Pope's a communist. So without getting into a tangent on that, they're trying to introduce as much chaos as possible, because chaos, modern human beings want a certain level of order. We don't want fascism, but we, like the world I grew up in, I'm going on 75. And I remember the 50s and at least the early 60s were really pretty great. Maybe they weren't so great if you were a person of color, but there was not a lot of chaos. We did worry about getting bombed by the Soviet Union, and we had to do the duck and cover training in the grade school. But, it was a much different world. And I don't want to sound like an old fogey here, but they have introduced so much chaos into this thing, because the more chaos you have, the more people live in fear. And the more people live in fear, the easier they are to be controlled. Of course, this whole, I don't know if I can say the word, but the whole COVID business, that was like, I think, a training exercise to see how much the powers that be could just throw at the general population and get them to comply. So yeah, that's right in the Illuminati / Freemasonic playbook. And again, in my book, Masonry Beyond the Light, and this has almost become a meme. There's a graphic in that book, which I've seen, I don't know how, maybe 100 different people post on Instagram or whatever, where you see this pyramid, just like on our dollar bill, And at the very bottom is Blue Lodge Masonry. And kind of in the middle is the Scottish Rite, the Grand Sovereign Council, the Inspectors General of the 33rd degree. And then we get into the Illuminati. And the Illuminati is real. It wasn't done away with in the latter part of the 18th century, like historians want you to think. It just keeps morphing into other things. So I don't know if that answers your question or what.
Yeah, I mean, with somebody who's practiced, the perspective on what's going on in the world, I think is very valuable, because you understand the mindset that a lot of these people have as they're implementing things in the world, and so I was just curious of your perspective on organizations like the World Economic Forum and the WHO. These organizations in recent, published videos will have speakers saying we must harness the state of the world today. We can't let this opportunity go to waste. And I was wondering if you knew any connections between those Carl Schwab types and these people that are running the WEF and the WHO and, all these 3-letter acronym names. We got the EU. What is the connection between some of these organizations you bumped shoulders with over the years and some of these people that are implementing these events like the COVID fear-mongering years or the masking protocols or pushing for all these agendas? What is the connection there between Freemasonry and the organizations you were with and some of these big 3-letter names?
Well, of course, understanding that I've been out of this stuff since 1984. Okay. So the people I knew are all, departed. I wouldn't want to be where they are, but, they're not here anymore. But I would just say this: I am reasonably certain that probably almost all of the big leadership in the WEF, people like Schwab and here's the thing, both in America, in Britain especially, and probably, because again, realize the Grand Orient Masonry is most powerful in Europe and ironically in Latin America, especially Brazil. I was down ministering in Brazil 20 some years ago, and I was astonished. All the Masonry down there is Grand Orient, which means it's very nasty. And I guess what I'm saying is that I would be very surprised if almost all of these people at the heads of these organizations weren't also Freemasons. They might not advertise it, just like in America. I mean, it used to be that the judiciary was all Freemasons. Literally, like the Supreme Court, which overturned Roe v. Wade, was made entirely up of Masons, high-level 33rd degree Masons. They're basically black robe Satanists. Now, obviously, with the introduction of female justices, that's not necessarily always the case, although there is a female branch of Masonry. I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit trail or not, but for the most part, a lot of cops, a lot of state police, a lot of lawyers, and by extension, a lot of judges are Freemasons. And that puts a whole kind of wrench into the criminal justice system, both here and in Europe, in the UK. And I'm sure that most of these bigwigs that are working for this, because, Albert Pike, and do you think your listeners know who he was or not? Anyway, he's a very high level, very influential 19th century Freemason who was also a Confederate general and the co-founder, wait for it, the Ku Klux Klan. And he wrote this monumental book called Morals and Dogma, which is like the Bible, if you will, of the Scottish Rite. And in that book, and again, I document this in my book, he talks about how in Masonry, all different religions, the Buddhist, the Christian, he said Muhammadan, which is a word we don't really use anymore, and the Din, all of these different religions can gather around the altar of Freemasonry in hospitality and worship the great architect of the universe. And you might ask, well, who is that? Well, it's Lucifer. But, that's another conversation. So, yeah, I think almost all of these people, they want a one world government, they want a one world religion, and they want them to be blended together because they all realize, these people, that true religion, whether it's, Christianity or to a lesser extent, Judaism, is their enemy because it is individual. Those faiths are individualistic. They are not like, you're not just a cog in a machine. That's how they view us. And I was taught this when I was in this stuff, that the vast majority of humanity are cattle. And they're just there just like the cows are, or the beef cattle are on a cattle ranch. They're there to be fed and slaughtered when you're ready to slaughter them, and then you feed on them, literally. That's how they think. That's why they're giving, like this famous line, "Oh, you will own nothing and you will be happy, and you'll eat bugs." That's very much in line with Masonry.
Do you you mentioned Albert Pike, and I was curious your perspective on this. One, why do you think Albert Pike put so many of the secrets in Morals and Dogma? Was he kind of ousting the system that he was, so high ranking in? And after that, what is your opinion on the infamous World War letter that has been accredited to Albert Pike? Do you think there's legitimacy in that?
Well, to answer your first question, yeah, I think there is. I can't prove it, but I think it was legitimate. I've talked for years about the idea that there is what is called black science that is way beyond what we're seeing, in the media that supposedly science is capable of. And, I think, I can't remember exactly the term, but he talked about how he had like a telephone that he could see the future in. I don't know if I think he called it some sort of telephone. And maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I know they planned all of this stuff in advance. I talk about this in my video, Exposing the Illuminati from Within. And you've got to realize this book is formidable. I mean, it's like, this thick in hardcover. It's not easy to get. I had to get mine from an estate sale. I mean, you find it every now and then because it's only given to 33rd degree Masons. You can't just, of course, nowadays with Amazon, you could probably go and buy it on Amazon, but it's used. But it wasn't intended to be released to the general public. So I think it was considered to be a marching orders, so to speak, a Torah, if you will, for the elite. And of course, he believed that anybody that got to the 32nd or 33rd degree was a spiritually elite person, a mastermind, a giant spiritual being that was destined to become a god. And he wanted them to know. And if you look at the whole thing, the book, he's basically talking about a combination of Luciferianism and Zoroastrianism. And the Zoroastrianism today is called the Farsi faith. It was the official religion of Iran before the Ayatollah came in. And there are millions of Farsis in the world, and they believe there's two gods. Ahriman, who's evil, and Ahura Mazda, who's good. And that's what Pike believed. He said there's two gods. The evil god is named Adonai, and the good god is named Lucifer, the light bringer. So, and he puts this right out there. And it's in the book. But again, I don't think it was intended to be read by the average person. It was intended to be read only by high-level Masons. The funny thing is, when I was in all this stuff, I would go up, like I was in Kilburn Lodge number 3 in Milwaukee. They had a library. It wasn't that much because it's a small lot. They had Morals and Dogma sitting on the shelf gathering dust. And when I joined the Scottish Rite, same city, I went to the Scottish Rite Cathedral. Yeah, it's called a cathedral. Big, wonderful building, very rich. And they have this huge library. Not only did they have Morals and Dogma, they had Crowley's works, they had Arthur Waite's works, they had works of every prominent 20th century occultist on their shelves. Now, how much of those books were read by the average Scottish Rite Mason is another question, but they're there. And I think the idea was, if you're worthy, quote unquote, you will be drawn to these books and read them and understand your destiny. Kind of like Satanic Calvinism.
How much is your passion going to drive you to read the texts and figure out what this is all about, I guess?
Oh, it's a very hard book to read. I mean, it's about as boring as watching ice melt. And of course, he uses a lot of obscure philosophical terms. I mean, I'm fortunate I have a degree in philosophy, but it's a very hard book to get to.
All right, Jeremiah, did you have some more questions as well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what was your relationship with my dad, Rob Skiba? Like, how did you guys meet?
Well, I mean, I of course knew of him and really admired his work. And I had not met him. I think we talked on the phone, and I might have even been on his show at one point. And then this whole flat earth thing started. And I know he just got slammed for that. I mean, I know just about everybody and their brother were attacking him.
Yep.
And I just felt lit. I mean, I think by that time our YouTube channel maybe had 150 videos up. And I just really felt led to speak out about it and its relationship with the Gnosticism that Paul warns us about. Science, what the King James calls science, falsely so called. And so I put up a video that was pro-flat earth. And I just said, I don't know how you can be a Bible-believing Christian and believe, and I know you guys probably know this stuff better than I. And I guess he saw it, because what he told me personally, both over the phone and in person, when I was at that conference, was that he was at kind of a deep, dark point in his life, because he felt like maybe I made a big mistake. He had lost donors, and I lost donors too. When I put out my video, I lost one of our biggest donors because they said I was a nut. And anyway, and he said it just came, that video that I did at the right moment, and he was very appreciative, because I gave him credit. I said, this is something that needed to be broached within the body of Messiah, and nobody was talking about it. And so I just kind of put my flag in his camp. And so I think that was maybe when he had me on his show. And then later on, we did that conference. I know you were there, Jake. And, we spoke at length, and I was just blessed to really meet him. I think he's a martyr. I think he is a martyr in the truest sense of someone, because the word martyr in Greek means witness. And he was witnessing the true faith, not just, typically Christian stuff of the Bible and the Torah and all of that, but also the fact that we need to take the Bible over science, quote unquote, falsely so called. So I think he was a great man of Elohim, and like I said, a martyr.
Yeah, and sadly he used his life. I mean, he used to expose the medical system, and then he was killed by the medical system. So, I mean, yeah. They just tried to silence him, in my opinion. But have you, chasing all these other religions and stuff, ever been like, after speaking out, have you ever been like threatened or anything like that?
You could say that. I mean, I've been tried to be run over. I've been shot at. I've been poisoned in a hospital to the point of death. That was way back in the 90s. And of course, we are under constant spiritual bombardment, because we have, Masons and Mormons and Catholics and witches and Satanists all hate us. And I mean, that's one or two times that people have tried to run me over with a semi. But yeah, we've had a lot. We have death threats almost all the time. We had, right after the 9/11 attack, someone sent us poison in an envelope We have to open our letters now wearing a mask and rubber gloves. And we pray over everything, of course, too. Because, yeah, we get a lot of death threats.
Yeah, so did my dad. It was, even after his passing, we still got death threats. And it was just,
wow.
It's just, people can be so insensitive, which is fine. They have the right to feel how they want to feel, but, you know. I do have a fan submitted question that wanted me to ask you something. Can I ask that?
Sure.
Okay. So she said, this is Tammy K. Shout out to Tammy K. She asked, do you mind asking him about a club called the Oddfellows? It is part of a Mason group, but I haven't been able to find out much information about them. And that was her question.
Yeah, that's a pretty simple answer. The Oddfellows were started by a Mason who didn't like the Masons. He felt their oaths were too weird, and they are. I mean, you wouldn't believe you even in the first degree, you swear oaths on a Bible in the name of God that are blood curdling. And this fellow, no pun intended, I don't know his name, I'm sorry. But way back in the 19th century, he decided this just wasn't for him. But he liked the idea of a fraternal secret club, quote unquote. So he started up the International Order of Oddfellows. And it's basically, I call it Masonry Light, L-I-T-E, because it's been stripped of a lot of its objectionable stuff. It's occult underpinnings, but it still requires you to take an oath. And of course, both Yeshua and Yaakov Hazadik, James, say we are not supposed to swear oaths. I mean, I think it was Yaakov, James, who said, above all things, my brethren, swear no oaths. And yet, in order to be an Oddfellow or a Freemason, you have to swear an oath. And just the oaths in the Oddfellows are much less creepy. I would not advise anybody joining the Oddfellows either, because if you're a Christian, I mean, if you're not, have at it. But there's this whole thing of being unequally yoked, 2 Corinthians 6. We're not supposed to be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And when you enter these organizations, you enter into a thing where you're under a spiritual head that isn't Yeshua. This is more obvious in the Masonic Lodge, but when you join the Oddfellows, or even like the Moose or the Lions or the Eagles, I call them the animal lodges, you're joining with people in some sort of a solemn covenantal way that are not necessarily Christians. And that's not a good thing. I mean, we do obviously in this world today have to do that to a degree. Like if you buy a house, you've got to enter into a covenantal relationship with either a bank or the person you're buying the house from, or anything like that. That's something we just have to do unless you do everything by cash. But you don't want to, I tell people, you don't want any more of these things hanging on you than necessary. And fraternal societies are not necessary in any sense of the word. So, I don't know a lot about what actually goes on within the Oddfellows. I never was one, but I do know they require you to take an oath of secrecy, and that's not scriptural. So stay away from it, and, that's my advice.
Okay. I'll make sure she hears this. What's your passion and desire for the future, and can you tell us more about your ministry and how people can reach you?
Well, my passion is to just reach as many people as possible with the message of Yeshua, the gospel. We also are helping a lot of people. We have a Living Waters ministry, which is kind of an outgrowth of With One Accord Church Ministries, where we're helping needy people, because I believe that's a huge part of the gospel. James, Yaakov, says that pure religion and undefiled is to keep yourself unspotted from the world and to help the widows and the orphans. And we're trying to do that. And additionally, of course, we have a YouTube channel where I think we've got over 250 YouTube videos now, where again, we're teaching We're teaching the Torah, we're teaching the gospel, and we're also giving some health advice stuff because I am a naturopathic doctor. And we've gotten bumped a few times by YouTube because of things we've said about the.
So if
we had a video. It was years ago. It was long before COVID.
Yeah.
We put out a video called Medical Babylon, and it had a picture of a church, like the thumbnail, you know. It was a picture of a conventional-looking church, but the steeple was a hypodermic needle. And it sat there for years. And then all of a sudden, about 4 or 5 months ago, we've had to take this video down because it's misinformation. You know, we got one warning. That was for, I forget what, it was something to do with pedophilia. That's why we opened up our Rumble channel. So we got that. And of course, we've got dozens of DVDs. I've written 8 books. And our website is withooneaccord.org. And we have lots of free stuff. I mean, we've got, what do you want to call it? Like teachings, we have prayers, sample prayers for like deliverance. Because a huge component of what we used to do, we don't do it so much anymore because of time and I'm getting older. Deliverance, setting people free from the demonic. And we wrote our book, Blood on the Doorpost, to be like a graduate course in spiritual warfare and deliverance. We've got Romancing Death, which is about the vampire thing. It was huge when the book was written about 10 years ago. The whole Twilight saga and that stuff. And Masonry Beyond the Light, we've got a book called Wicca, which is about white witchcraft. And we have Space Invaders, which is about the whole UFO thing and how it's a spiritual perception. So we have a lot of information out there that people can download free. Of course, our YouTube channel is free. We're not monetized. And we're just a faith-based ministry that's trying to help as many people as we can and get as much important information out there. Because frankly, people contact us every day, either by phone or email. They say, we've never heard any of this stuff. We've been in church for 20 years and nobody's ever said anything about this. Or their churches have bowed the knee to the COVIDian cult, or their churches have, got gay people getting married in them, or any number of stuff. So we try to provide intel. We try, like for example, in 2 days is a major satanic holiday. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but it's called Imbolc or Candlemas. And it's a witch thing and a Satanist thing. And we put out warnings on our YouTube channel for Christians, for believers to gear up, put their armor on, and be prepared, because every one of these feasts is like a crisis point where Satanists are trying to reach out and either kill people or deflower virgins. And this is real. I mean, people say, oh, this is all made up. It isn't. I used to be a Satanist, and it's a real thing. And don't even get me started on this stupid, satanic temple episode.
Jake,
so that's basically our ministry, yeah.
Awesome. Jake, you mentioned vampires. I don't know if y'all want to get into that, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah. Just before Bill shares his story briefly, I mentioned that documentary, and I think the thing that was really interesting to me is because, working with Rob was always talking about the fallen angels and the Nephilim, and doing research on this documentary. At the time you had Twilight and True Blood, like all these different vampire shows glorifying, beautifying the vampire kind of imagery and being a vampire. And through that research, we discovered that the OG vampire traces its roots back to the blood cults of the Indus River Valley and those who were worshiping demons, offering blood. And then Bill has this really, really interesting story of his time, practicing vampirism for a while. So Bill, if you felt like sharing that.
Yeah, I don't talk about that as much because it tends to just blow people's minds that things like this are going on, but they really are. And as I was going, if you will, down the ladder of Satanism, there's this, I outlined the organizational chart of hell in my book, Lucifer the Throne. there's this point where you have to cross, they call it the abyss, and you get to be a higher level devil worshiper, and you get to make a choice. You either can become a werewolf or a vampire, one or the other, and both are real, believe me, because I've been attacked twice by werewolves since getting saved. And anyway, I knew somebody who was a werewolf, and he warned me it's really painful. So I thought, well, besides that, vampires are kind of sexy. Even back then, there was a, the Frank Langella Dracula movie where he was portrayed as this really sexy, hot male model type, a long way away from the Bela Lugosi, I want to drink your blood, kind of metaphor. So anyhow, I chose that path. And I did a whole bunch of preparatory stuff, which I'm not going to go into. And to make it brief, I believe it was a fallen angel. A fallen, some kind of supernatural being who was real. He had a body as solid as you or mine. And he came to me in the middle of a ritual and tore open his chest with his fang and had me drink blood out of his chest, which is interesting because you wouldn't think a fallen angel would have blood, but that's a side note. And I went through a thing where for 3 days I had to stay in a coffin that I had built according to Satanic specifications. When we came out, I had all of the stuff that's in Hollywood isn't true, but I couldn't really tolerate sunlight. I could not tolerate garlic, and I couldn't eat anything. All I could drink was blood and Catholic communion. Now at that time I was an old Catholic priest, so every day I said Mass and I drank the wine in the chalice, and I was able to get by. Plus I had 5 or 6 girls in our coven that were perfectly happy, one a night to let me drink some of their blood to keep me going. But it was a terrible existence. I had incredibly foul breath, and I was constantly ravenous for blood. And I had to work at night. I got a job working for the Milwaukee Sentinel, putting newspapers in those big tin boxes, they have on street corners. I don't even have those anymore, but anyhow, and I drive the streets at night at 1 or 2 in the morning, which is when my shift was. And if I'd see a isolated, homeless person or hooker or whatever on the street, it was all I could do to not attack them and drink their blood, because I wanted fresh meat, quote unquote. And it was not like they make it in the movies. And so that was where I was at when this thing with the chick comic happened. I could not go out in daylight. Or if I did, I'd have to wear a hat, a big broad-brimmed hat, or something like that. And it was a horrible existence. And I'm so glad that Yeshua set me free of it. But it also involved huge amounts of cocaine. I took more cocaine probably than Hunter Biden. it was, and the devil provided it for me for free. In order to do this one ceremony I just described, I had to snort 30 lines of coke. This was right before crack came. Because I was doing drugs, I was doing LSD, I was doing cannabis, all that stuff. But when I prayed that prayer, for whatever reason, and to this day, this is a mystery of divine grace, that when that lady prayed for me from the bank, all that vampiric stuff I was set free from, which is a good thing, because it was hard to be a Mormon vampire. Anyway, it was just a miracle, just like I was, even though I hadn't yet actually formally prayed, quote unquote, to receive Yeshua, a lot of that stuff was liberated off of me just by the graciousness of the Almighty King of the universe, Yeshua HaMashiach. So, vampirism is real. I think these high-level people, all this stuff that's come out about Pizzagate a few years ago, that's what got us kicked off of YouTube, that one video. Was we talked about, Podesta and Hillary and Pizzagate and all of that. And I think those people are up there drinking blood because they believe, okay, we just did a new DVD, it's been about 4 months, it's called Pedophilia, Satanic Rite and Royal Secret. And let me just end this little sidebar with this. The Masonry, in the 32nd degree, it's called the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. And if, when I was in this, I would go up and I would ask guys that have been in Scottish Rite like for 20 years or more, what's the Royal Secret? Well, they don't know. Nobody knows what the Royal Secret is. Well, later on I learned the Royal Secret is the belief that if you drink blood and or have sex with young children, you will live a very long time and maybe even forever if you're a good little Satanist. That's at the core of Freemasonry, that belief. And we document that in this video. So that's on our website.
And how can people find it? Just on your website?
It's on the website at withonaccord.org. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
We also have it on Vimeo because we have a lot of international people. I'm sure you probably have this too. Mm-hmm. That you don't believe what you send a 4.5 ounce video to Canada and it costs more than the video.
Yep.
The postage. So we try to put everything we can of our DVD. We also have all of our books are available in digital format that they can just get it off of Vimeo. So if you happen to live in Australia or Europe or whatever, you can get pedophilia off of Vimeo or any 15 other videos.
Now I know a lot of people are like, wow, how can this be? Some of the dark cults and practices that are going on right under our nose, and I think it relates to the child trafficking and the human trafficking. Those numbers are insane. I mean, where are all these people disappearing to? Well, they're disappearing partially to satisfy the sex trade, but also to satisfy some of these other more dark groups. And I think that quote that says the smartest thing Satan ever did was to convince people he doesn't exist, right? And so whenever we share some of these topics and we look at some of these darker tales, I mean, recognizing that the devil's real and that this stuff is actually going on can help people wake up and realize that the opposite side exists as well. Like, sometimes it takes somebody being shaken by the reality of the darkness in the world to recognize that there is, a truth. There's a savior. There's, the opposite side of the equation that they've been kind of led to just be numb to. And so that's why I think it's so important to cover some of these stories and share that, people are practicing, for one side, and that conversely makes the other side just as legitimate and real.
Yes. And, if I could share one account about because I know a lot of people want to hear the word werewolves, that's even more unbelievable than the vampire thing. Because in the book, Romancing Death, I actually document how there's a lot of psychiatric literature about vampirism. And people that there's hundreds of people in psych wards, and maybe not anymore, the way that government's going, that really believe they're vampires and they're running around biting people and drinking their blood. There are vampire nightclubs in LA and Frisco where people can actually go and order blood and drink blood, either from one another, and they call it consensual vampirism, or they can, I don't know where they get it, I don't want to know. But the werewolf thing is a little more of a stretch. And I'll tell you a true story. When I was out in Seattle, this was in the middle of what has come to be known infamously as the Satanic Panic. From about 1987 all the way through the early 90s. Nowadays people say, oh, that was all just made up. Geraldo did a TV special about people that were survivors of satanic abuse. That is a real thing. As much as the media has been working for 40 years to try and cover it up. Well, anyway, I would frequently get calls from the police because of satanic ritual sites in the Puget Sound area. And this was a particularly monstrous thing that happened. We got a call because there was a little boy, 5 or 6 years old. No, he was more like 10. Anyway, and he tells the story of how he and his little friend were out on their bikes after dark, not real smart, and they were biking through a landfill which had methane, stuff coming out of it. They were burning off. It was a hellish place. And see, that's the kind of place that Satanists love to worship. And anyhow, they were biking through this thing, and all of a sudden they came upon a ritual. They saw this group of people wearing black robes lifting up a naked girl and slitting her throat and throwing her body in a fire. And they just totally freaked out, naturally. And they turned around and pedaled as fast as they could the other way. Well, anyhow, the boy that ended up testifying about this said they heard something following. And they turned around and they saw this huge, furry figure bounding after them on 2 legs that was probably 8 feet tall. And it got closer and closer and closer. And both of these kids were just pedaling like, well, their lives were literally depending on it. And all of a sudden, the kid said he heard his friend just scream, and he looked behind and he was gone. So he just really, talk about a shot of adrenaline. He kept pedaling for all of his worth, and he could hear this thing coming, boom, boom, boom. Its feet shook the earth. It was that big. And he could feel the thing's breath on his back, he said. And all of a sudden, this enormous claw with 5 fingers, like a human hand, but twice the size with giant talons on it, grabbed him by the chest, like to pull him off the bike. And this child was a Christian. And he just cried out, "Oh, Jesus!" And the thing just pulled his hand away like it was scalded. And he ran away, he pedaled away, got home. His mother took him to the doctor, and I saw this kid's chest. There were like 5 giant scars across his chest. It needed, I don't know how many stitches. And that was a werewolf. And the werewolves are typically used to guard ritual sites, to keep, people from finding things out, and also as assassins. Because a lot of the enemies of Satan are found dead, mauled by a wild animal, quote unquote. And anyhow, the police took me up there because they knew I was an expert on the occult. And the whole place had been cleaned up. There was not even a sign of a fire in that area where the child said that. So they're really good at covering their tracks. But that's an example of what a werewolf can do, and what the power of the Mane, of Yeshua HaMashiach, can do against it. So, glory to Elohim.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Bill, before we wrap up our interview, I value your opinion on current events as well, and I just wondered, what are some of your thoughts about the world today? With things going on, we have conflict in the Middle East, wars, rumors of wars type things. We have just recently Elon Musk mentioned or just announced the first human trial of Neuralink being implanted in a person just this week. A lot of things happening in the world today. It's almost to the point where there's so many balls that you have to juggle and pay attention to. You feel like you're bound to drop one or two. But what are your thoughts? What's the world looking like in your opinion? In relation to eschatology and the coming Messiah.
Well, I'll tell you, obviously you don't need me to tell you the world is totally messed up, and it's deliberately being messed up. And I am very, very concerned. I know Yeshua is on the throne, and I don't happen to be a believer in the pre-trib rapture, but I do think we're very close to the end times. Of course, in John's first epistle, he said we are in the last days. So I can say with perfect confidence we are in the last days. But I think everything is lining up. I mean, like you say, this thing from Musk, you know, I personally have never taught that the mark of the beast is a microchip or something like that. I came out against that 20 years ago. I was telling people then, and I'm telling people now, it's going to be some sort of. And I have a dear friend who's a very solid Christian, and his job, and you may know people like this as well, whose job forced them to take. He was a spirit-filled believer, and he told me, called me up, and he said, because he was in another state, he said, I feel as though the light of God has gone out. He was just heartbroken. And I also know another lady she was in the healthcare industry and she had to get a shot, and she's okay. So I don't know how that works, but I do know that they're trying everything they can to herd us like cattle into a pen, if you will, and make us all get these. I know they got this new, whatever they call it, disease X, and hopefully people are going to be smart enough this time not to fall for it. But I think I would be very surprised. I mean, my personal eschatology is I think that the day of the Lord will be in or around 2030. And the only reason I say that is because sometime around 30 AD, in Luke 4, Yeshua talked about that he came that day, that year, to declare the acceptable year of Yahweh. And so if you take 50 years, the Jubilees, the Jovel, you're going to end up with somewhere around 2030. It's going to be 2,000 years of Jubilees. And to me, that's a pretty compelling thing. I'm not saying it like this is the word of the mighty, but to me, it makes a lot of sense. And I know other people have other things that they believe, but that's what I think. And I think we're building up to that, because the more, and of course, the other thing that's happening is the more things get intense and terrifying, some people are going to run in the wrong direction. But a lot of people are going to run toward the cross, toward Yeshua. And that's my prayer, and that's what we're trying to work toward. And I mean, we're hearing stories now of literally thousands of Muslims coming to Yeshua just because of visions, because of course those countries are not able to be reached for the most part with evangelism. And I think there is a real move of Elohim going on under the surface, even as all these leaders are trying to pile on all this junk, whether it's, climate change or eating bugs or crushing our economies. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't look at Donald Trump to be our savior. I think he might slow the tide if he gets elected and if they don't shoot him or something. I think he might be good for the country. I don't know. I certainly don't, place my hope in him, because I only have hope in Yeshua. Because I know people will let you down, but he will never let you down. And I mean, I went through so much stuff in my life before I got saved, and I've gone through a lot of stuff since I've been saved. But I would say this: the power of Yeshua to work miracles and to protect his people. And I don't know, and I'm sure, Jeremiah, you're thinking, well, why didn't he protect my father? I don't know that. But for whatever reason, he got to go to hell. And I wish I understood the providence of Elohim, but I don't. So I'm sorry, we got a phone going on here. Anyhow, so that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we're very close to the end, and I'm thinking people should probably do whatever they can to be self-sufficient to have, to be sort of a prepper, I mean, to the extent they're able, and pray, draw closer to Messiah, cling to his robes. And I'm sure probably you may have even heard this quote, but a rabbi once said that you need to stay so close to your rabbi behind him that you can eat the dust that comes up from his sandal. That's what we need to do with our rabbi, Yeshua. Stay so close to him, cling to his tzitzit, hold on to his promise that he will be with us and he will never forsake us. And, look, there's a huge history of noble men and women who are martyrs down through the centuries. And right now there are more Christians being martyred in the world than ever before. I don't know if you guys know that. Millions of Christians are being slain every year. And they're all witnesses to the power of the cross of Christ. And I find myself being one tiny, I'm trying to be the best witness I can. And also a witness of how powerful the cross is over the occult, over, all of these weird New Age things and cults. So, I mean, I don't know for sure. I can give you that 2030 date and just tell you to gird up your loins, put on your battle armor, and prepare for a fight. And also do what you can to be physically prepared.
Thank you. All right, Jeremiah, that was my last question. Any more for you?
Oh, no, I just want to say thank you for coming on Skiba News Nation. You're always welcome to come back. Is there anything else that you would like to say? Or?
Well, I think I've pretty much said it. I would appreciate if people would pray for our ministry and, obviously check out our resources, both free and the things that we buy. And please pray about supporting the work of the ministry, because we're supporting orphans over in India. We're supporting needy people all over America with some of our resources, and we're trying to do our very best to, again, offer pure religion, undefiled, and to offer the gospel of Yeshua HaMashiach. So please pray for us and pray about supporting us. And thank you so much for having me on. I'd be delighted to come back whenever.
Yeah, we'd love you back. Well, thank you. Thank you again for coming on Skiba News Nation.
Okay. Shalom.
Shalom. Huge shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. We couldn't do this show without you, so I just wanted to say thank you. And if you want to help support us, go to patreon.com/Skiba News Nation.
What it costs. I want to know what the truth is. And I hope that people, my son, anybody, if my name comes up, whether you like me, whether you agree with me or not, at least you could respect the fact that he's on a quest for truth. He's on a quest for truth.